Welcome back to Kings of Columbus on the podcast. Doug Lamarice and Bill Landis, the 10 most important people in the Ohio State-Penn State game, Landis. We don't want to muck around. This is the real deal. For a full big game breakdown and our picks, I'm not ready to make a pick yet. Are you ready to make a pick yet?
I kind of have already made a pick yet based off the playoff projections we did, right? But no, I'd like to think a little more about like how I think it's going to go.
I'm not trying to like tease people. I'm not trying to get people to watch Kings of the North. I'm just telling you, we're going to do a gigantic big game breakdown on Thursday's Kings of the North, which you can find in your podcast feed and on YouTube on a separate channel. And I'll make my pick there. Bill will make his pick there. This is not that. But we want to bring you, this Ohio State audience, good content about this hugely important game, the second top 5 matchup in the history of Ohio State Penn State. So we're not trying. We're just telling you what's up because we think this is important too to talk about who matters most to this game. So Bill, you and I are going to draft the 10 people we think will have the most influence on this game. We did send it out to the texters who they think matters most for this game. We'll work in some of their comments along the way. And so let's just do that. And I think we will have the conversations we want to have and need to have about this game in the course of this draft. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we will. And I think both of us, as we're still trying to like crystallize our thoughts on what will happen a little bit, will probably be helped in that endeavor by what we discuss here.
Yes. I always like talking it out. Yes. Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite at State College, noon on Saturday. I will say this off the top. I don't know who I'm going to pick. I honestly don't, but I think I am more inclined to potentially pick Indiana to beat Ohio State than to pick Penn State to beat Ohio State here. So that can sound crazy. Both Penn State and Indiana are near the top of the nation in sort of offensive efficiency ratings of doing your job. But I do think, Bill, there's a little bit of like James Franklin hasn't really ever got it done against Ohio State. He has one win. Curt Cignetti's new to this. He doesn't care. So right. I do think maybe there is a little bit of something for Penn State to overcome here that is not there for Indiana. Now, like Indiana's never beaten Ohio State whenever, but I don't know that this version of the Hoosiers are held back by the past, where I actually think this version of the Nittany Lions might be held back by the past. It's at least something a little bit to overcome. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, Indiana, new staff and like new roster, many of whom like didn't start their careers in Indiana, right? So I don't know if all the outside stuff is as applicable to that game as it is here, especially the James Franklin thing. So I think that it's funny, right? And I'm not saying they're unfair criticisms. The criticisms that Ryan Day gets for not winning top 5 matchups like this one he's going into, the criticisms of James Franklin not beating Ohio State for that fan base are like just as loud. And one of them has to win out here, I guess. So
yeah, it really is almost the same conversation. Ohio State's conversation is just a level up, because I do think the Ohio State fan base in a lot of ways takes beating Penn State for granted, because often when you talk about big games that Ohio State has played, when you talk about big games on Ryan Day's record, the Penn State wins don't get counted often. Now, maybe it's just because you're drawing the line at top 5, you're drawing the line at top 10, you're drawing the line at top 25, whatever. But when people say big games, Ryan Day has never lost to Penn State and Notre Dame, and those were all, but like they don't count. But yet the losses for James Franklin against Ohio State are the number one thing that gets held against him. So I do think that I think that's a reality but what Ohio State fans feel about Ryan Day against Michigan the last 3 years, against Bama, against Georgia, is exactly the same thing Penn State fans feel about James Franklin versus Ohio State, Michigan. So.
Correct. Am I right that only 2 of the Ohio State Penn State games that Ryan Day has coached in have been top 10 games?
That is correct.
2019 and last year.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, Ryan Day is 2-0 against Penn State and 2-0 against Notre Dame in the top 10 games. Ryan Day is 10-8. And then this is a top 5 game. It's only the second top 5 game in the history of the rivalry. So a lot of people are using those stats. I just did top 10. I don't know that I just try to be a slightly more holistic. Ryan Day's 10-8 in top 10 games. James Franklin's 3-17. And James Franklin in those top 10 games is 1-8 against Ohio State and 0-5 against Michigan. So he's 3-17 in top 10 games, James Franklin is, and 1-13 of that is against Ohio State and Michigan. So that's like the reality of that. He's 0-2 against Michigan State. He's 1-0 against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. He's 0-1 against USC in the Rose Bowl. He's 0-1 against Iowa, and he's 1-0 against Utah. So that's where James Franklin is. So this is mostly about him not beating Michigan and Ohio State when they're good. Okay. Let's do the draft. You can start first. The most important person, player, coach, coordinator, trainer, motivational speaker, mascot, whatever you want to do, as long as they are a human, no robots. Who's number one for you?
It is whoever is playing left tackle for Ohio State.
I also think that's the number one pick.
And we can discuss who we think that might be, but I think that is the spot where, if it is not an abject disaster, that then the game becomes more about all the other matchups and whether or not you think Ohio State has advantages there, which certainly I think you would come to that conclusion for some of them, right? But we've seen what it looks like when Ohio State goes to Beaver Stadium and has a tackle position that just isn't working. We saw it in 2016 with Isaiah Prince when I just double checked, 14 pressures allowed by Isaiah Prince in that game. So even for nobody liked what they saw from Zemmelhowski last week, that wasn't even close to what we saw of Isaiah Prince in Beaver Stadium in 2016. That was a night game. It was a whiteout. It was louder. These conditions will probably be a little more subdued than that, although it would still be a tough road environment for Ohio State. But the left tackle position cannot become a thing that preoccupies Chip Kelly's mind, Ryan Day's mind, Will Howard's mind, to the point of it making the offense then dysfunctional. So I think that it is by far the most important that person, whoever it is, again, is the most important person in this game.
I did ask texters, if you want to be a tech subscriber, you can sign up at 614-662-4509. It's $6 a month to get our surveys and insights and information about Ohio State football. And we like to include you guys when we do the podcast and the shows here. 614-662-4509. Send the text to that. Shannon replied, whoever plays left tackle, self-explanatory. Like it's almost too obvious, but something as bad as it was last week, can't be too obvious. This is Albin. They said Donovan Jackson, he doesn't have to be flawless. He just has to hold down left tackle so that he doesn't need help every pass play. Giving help by double teaming, keeping the tight end or chipping can disrupt the offensive flow. So this is an assumption by that texter that the left tackle spot will be manned by Donovan Jackson moving out from left guard. Steven says, if we can't run or pass block consistently, I don't know how we score 24 points offensively in choosing left tackle. And then the other one I pulled was Keller saying Donovan Jackson, he has to be the left tackle and he has to do well enough to let the offense work. He doesn't have to be perfect, but a B tackle performance and the rest of their line doing their job, and we win this game. Do you think it will be Donovan Jackson?
I do. Ryan Day on Tuesday was asked about the availability of Zemmelhowski. He said they had to see how things go in practice this week. We'll talk to him again on Wednesday night to maybe get a better idea of that, or maybe try to get eyeballs on Zen walking off the practice field if he's there. Ryan Day also said initially that if Zemmelhowski is healthy, that he would be the guy who starts at left tackle. But then he was asked a follow-up about it again. It was basically like, are you sure about that? And Ryan Day said, well, we'll evaluate it. We have to first find out if he's available, and then we'll see. He certainly didn't he this is me paraphrasing. He didn't play very well. And he gave up a lot of blown plays there that set the offense back. So I think people took that initial quote of he'll start if he's healthy and ran with it. And I think chose to ignore the follow-up context of Ryan Day pulling back from that. I thought significantly. So, I think there's a chance that even if Zen's healthy, and I don't think he is, and I don't think he'll play, but let's say he was, there's a chance that he wouldn't be the left tackle anyway. But I am anticipating that it will be Donovan Jackson, and I am less certain on who would be the left guard in that case.
Okay. Kyle also added the offensive line. Is that cheating? If the offensive line plays well, Ohio State wins probably by more than 2 scores. So we have some other offensive line people that did get mentioned. I do think it is mostly a left tackle conversation, but right guard has also been an issue. And That's been an issue with both Tegra Shabola and Austin Saraveld at times. If Saraveld's the one who moves to left guard, now it's like, okay, now maybe you're not sure about either guard, and now you're taking a veteran and moving him to a new position. It is potentially quite disruptive, but there's a part of me that thinks it can't be worse than it was last week. Do you think it could be worse than it was last week?
I don't think Donovan Jackson would play worse than Zen Mohalski did. Might the aggregate of the offensive line play entirely be worse because of how much moving around you're doing? Maybe. Because they were able to keep their 4 starters in their regular spots and just have one new guy there last week.
Yeah.
So if you're and I guess they're be able to keep 3 in this case, but to your point, like I don't know that Tegra Shabola or Austin Saraveld have played very well. Ryan Day kind of agreed with that assessment on Tuesday, which is why that would be my guess that it's Austin Saraveld who plays left guard, but Luke Montgomery is the one who went into the game last week against Nebraska. The explanation for that was he was the one who had been practicing behind Donovan Jackson at left guard. I guess like Austin Saraveld had been practicing at right guard because when they put him in the game, they put him in with Tegra. So I would assume that Austin's practicing at left guard this week, but Luke Montgomery is probably still there as well. And also Ryan Day said that Carson Hinsman would probably do things other than center, which I would take as him playing guard this week too. So I think it could be either or any of those 3 guys, Saraveld, Montgomery, or Hinsman. But my guess would be Saraveld.
Yeah, I would be surprised if it's not Saraveld. I think it's the conversation we have a lot of times with backup quarterbacks. There's the guy who goes in when somebody gets hurt. There's the guy who plays the next week when you have a whole week of prep. And the idea of, okay, because linemen at various times act like switching sides is no big deal. And then sometimes act like switching sides is a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
If Austin Saraveld had not been doing left side things, and to be like, okay, can you make sure in the middle of a game, okay, put in the guy who's at least been that handed, but now you have a whole week. I would assume it's Jackson at left tackle, Saraveld at left guard. And I think it will be better. Connor brought this up in one of the texts I read, and I did respond to him, but he said that I have a habit of overestimating Penn State people coming into the Ohio State Penn State game. And I don't think that's wrong, because I think what I try to do is help the audience understand that Penn State is good. And I know that James Franklin has only beaten Ohio State once, but Penn State's good. They are not as talented as Ohio State, but they are closer to the talent level than almost anybody else Ohio State plays. And don't take it for granted. So I'm always on the lookout for problem spots.
Mm-hmm.
And I've often been enamored with Penn State defensive ends. I think I talked a lot about Chop Robinson last year, and then he got hurt 12 plays in, and I think actually his injury kind of mattered a little bit. But then there was the year, was it Chop Robinson and Jason Owe, who's now Adofe Owe? But I was very concerned about them from an Ohio State perspective, and then the Ohio State tackles completely handled their business that year, and it was nothing. Mm-hmm. So we may end up drafting Abdul Carter because he's the other part of this equation for left tackle, but I don't know that I've ever felt as concerned about just the actual tackle situation for Ohio State as I have for this year, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember what I felt in 2016 going into that game.
Yeah.
I have a pretty good idea of how I felt afterward. Because it wasn't just Isaiah Prince. Looking back at that game, Michael Jordan gave a whole bunch of pressures too. That was a true freshman, Michael Jordan, starting for Ohio State. So Isaiah Prince was the one that everyone remembers, but in general, that offensive line got really overwhelmed in that game. So yeah, I don't know that we're staring down that necessarily, because I don't know that Penn State's defensive line is that. Abdul Carter's good, and Zane Durant is a very good tackle, and Dennis Sutton, who was injured last week, but if he plays, he's a great defensive end, right? So there's guys up there. Penn State has guys every year, but I think to the point of the texter who sent that in, I don't know that those guys who play really well throughout the season always show up when Penn State plays Ohio State. Probably more often than not, they have not, right?
I can remember really talking about Jason Owe, and then he did nothing against Ohio State, and then he was a first-round pick, and it's where. I guess does that mean that I was correct to think he would have an impact on the game, and then just Ohio State handled its business? But I do think what happens a decent amount in this series is Penn State has very good talent, but Ohio State has great talent and more of it. And that just constantly shows up. And like Penn State can't get over the top, and their best players maybe aren't making over the top plays. But I do think, and maybe we'll draft Abdul Carter, but especially if Deni Dennis Sutton doesn't play, because if he does play, that's 3 legit guys in the defensive line who can get after the quarterback. If he doesn't play, don't you think they'll hunt this matchup and just put Carter over the left tackle all game until that left tackle proves he can block him?
I do, and they've moved Carter around.
Yeah.
They were not. He was kind of stagnant, I think, on the right side, on the right side for much of the year. And then against Wisconsin, they started to move him more, and they'll move him off the ball, on the ball. He's a former linebacker. I think people know that, but yeah, I definitely think that they'll put, even if Sutton's healthy, I think they'll put Carter over the left tackle until Ohio State proves it can handle that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Number 2 pick, I will take Andy Kotelnicki, the Penn State defensive coordinator. And this is like the person that Connor was like, Doug won't stop talking about Andy Kotelnicki. It's really, this is like a Mike Yurcich offensive coordinator conversation, though. And it does go back a little bit to Joe Moorhead. So it goes back to when Joe Moorhead was the offensive coordinator at Penn State in 2016 and helped them get over the top in that game. He winds up being the offensive coordinator at Oregon in 2021. He helped the Oregon get over the top against Ohio State. Good offensive coordinators can really matter. Mm-hmm. And since Joe Moorhead, Andy Kotelnicki, no doubt about it, is the best offensive coordinator Penn State has had since Joe Moorhead left. And so the game last year, it just felt like that offense was in handcuffs the entire game. And then they got down 2 scores and they finally got a little desperate, and Drew Aller threw the ball down the field a little bit and they got a touchdown. It was like, why were they playing with handcuffs on the whole time? And then Mike Yurcich got fired. Didn't he get fired after the Ohio State loss? I think he did. I think it was 1 week later.
I can't remember if it was directly after that game or not.
It was very contributory to his firing, I believe. And so I'm not saying that Andy Kotelnicki has reinvented offense, but I just think he is so much better than anything they've had calling the shots on offense in the last 7 years that I think it can make a difference. And if they're creative and if they take smart shots and if they can scheme open their receivers, even though their receivers aren't that good, I really think it matters here. And it's just advice to not think that this is going to be a boring, stale, rudimentary, afraid to make mistakes Penn State offense that, frankly, I think we've seen in this game for the last 7 years.
I think that's right, provided that James Franklin allows that to happen, right? That was my thought when they made the hire is, will he let Andy Kotelnicki do his thing in the games that matter the most, i.e. this one. So we'll see. I think that he probably will, because it seems like he certainly has all year. The USC game was bonkers, all the stuff that Penn State was doing formationally. In that game, there have actually been times watching Penn State this year where I feel like Andy Kotelnicki is probably doing too much. Yeah. And I wonder if it's actually hurting the offense more than it is helping it. But they just give you a ton to prepare for, like formationally. There's not another team that Ohio State will see this year, regardless of who it plays, playoff, whatever, unless it plays Penn State again, that will make Jim Knowles like have to make sure he's on point with so many different things. So Yurcich was fired after the Michigan game last year. So they were bad against Ohio State. He kept his job. And then they were bad again against Michigan in November, and he got fired after that.
Okay. Would you have taken Kotelnicki pretty high?
I would have taken him pretty high. Yeah. I didn't know if we were actually going to like bundle the left tackle with Abdul Carter. So I had Carter fairly high as well, but
I think we're allowed to have I think we can have a separate Abdul Carter conversation to help Ohio State fans understand exactly who he is as a player. Because as you said, again, this is a guy who's been a rush end, has also played linebacker, moves around a little bit. So yeah, I think that's allowed. So who's your third pick?
So I think I would take Carter third.
Okay.
Because of everything he does for the offense, or for the defense, excuse me. Because that's not just, in my opinion, that's not just a left tackle conversation. Because I think Josh Fryer will have his hands full with Abdul Carter too. I just think he is a guy who he's not probably been as productive. He has not been as productive as people thought he was going to be. He only has 4 sacks. He has 21 pressures. I think it was taking him a little while to kind of get his feet under him, like because he was an off-ball linebacker. They moved him this offseason to defensive end. He gets compared a lot to Micah Parsons. They wear the same jersey number.
Did Chip
he was
Kelly compare him to Micah Parsons?
Yes, Chip Kelly, and like, so I'm taking my cue on this a little bit from Chip Kelly, who similar to when Ohio State played Oregon. Like, Chip was asked about Oregon's defense. The first guy he talked about was Jordan Birch, and then Jordan Birch ended up not playing in that game. I think Chip was specifically asked about Abdul Carter in this instance, but he could not have been more complimentary of what Abdul Carter brings to the table, because he said his combination of speed and athleticism in like his body type at 6'3", 252 pounds is just rare. And it's hard to deal with. It's hard to deal with for offensive tackles who are used to dealing with guys who are maybe like a little longer and perhaps even slower than Abdul Carter is. And I think it's hard for like running backs who are trying to pick him up in pass protection, because he's also 252 pounds while playing that position. So I think they'll move him around. He to me, it's almost like a similar conversation to Caleb Downs with Ohio State. It's like the ultimate chess piece. You just really kind of move all over the board, and he unlocks a lot of different things for your defense. I would imagine there are things with him that Penn State has yet to show that Tom Allen would probably want to unleash in this game if the opportunities present themselves. So I'm not saying it's handle Abdul Carter and you're fine if you're Ohio State, because there are other good players on that defense. But I think he is definitely the most dynamic guy they have there, and capable of like wrecking Ohio State's game plan maybe by himself if the offensive tackles really struggle to block him.
I do think it really matters if Deni Dennis Sutton plays. So like that, if that's the guy opposite him, that's a good combo. So I'm
the other ends would be Smith Vilbert and Amin Vanover. I think would be the other two guys there that will play, and they're good. They're guys that James Franklin talks about all the time as like they think both have really high ceilings, but I think an honest assessment would be like they're not nearly as good as Deni Dennis Sutton or Abdul Carter.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably similar to Ohio State, right? That you could talk about Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, but if Ohio State was missing Jack Sawyer or JT Tuimoloau, it would matter.
Right.
I'll take Ryan Day here.
Okay.
And I do think there is probably a fundamental thing that if the head coach can get his team to play its best, Ohio State wins, which is like, to be fair to James Franklin, is not the James Franklin conversation. When you see that when Ohio State and Michigan, and maybe we'll get to James Franklin, but when Ohio State and Michigan are ranked in the top 10, again, James Franklin is 1-13 against them. That is not a situation where all James Franklin has to do is get Penn State to play its best and it'll win. He has to get Penn State to do more in those games. Ryan Day, so when Ryan Day is playing Georgia, when Ohio State's playing Georgia, when Ohio State's playing on the road at Oregon, I do think there are circumstances, but I think against Penn State, Ohio State just has to be Ohio State and they'll win. I still don't know. And I was on a Penn State radio show this week, and the host agreed, like, this is James Franklin's most complete team. This is the most complete Penn State team, but it's still not better than Ohio State. So if Ohio State plays its best, Ohio State wins. And that really is the job of the head coach. And I have more questions about Ryan Day based off the Nebraska game than I ever have at any point in his tenure. I just was gobsmacked that they did not come out off a loss following an off week and just assert their will. So I have questions about how Ohio State's going to play. Jordan picked Ryan Day. Does this guy have the humility to say, hey, we suck on the O-line. We have to figure out creative ways to move the ball now? And does he turtle up in key situations? Does his management of personnel, the clock, accountability, situational awareness, and special teams seriousness change? Is he going to pull out all the stops and go for broke? Because now is the time, my dude. Now is that time. I do think, Bill, sort of the tenor, and I'll read some more, but the tenor from some of these texts are, I do think sometimes the tenor for Ohio State fans around Penn State is Penn State's overrated, Penn State stinks. I do think there is more of an edge to the discussion here, that I don't think Ohio State fans are taking this game for granted that maybe they have in some ways against Penn State in the past. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right, but I don't know if that is a recalibration on the view of Penn State or just the fact that Ohio State already has a loss, so they're feeling like their backs up against the wall a little bit. Like I don't.
Yeah.
I think that point of view is shaped far more by Ohio State than it is anything people have seen from Penn State.
Yeah. Eric, plain and simple, it's Ryan Day. I believe his legacy is riding on this game, and another loss will cause the remaining Ryan Day defenders to jump ship. He cannot afford another loss against a top 5 team and another loss in general. I believe a second loss would be catastrophic for him, considering the expectations of this team's preseason. Also, another loss means we could potentially have seen the last of Lathan Ransom as a Buckeye, and maybe a few others decide to take the Nick Bosa route. So I will say I disagree with that, because if they lose to Penn State, they're not out of the playoff race.
Right.
If Ohio State beats Penn State but wins out in the regular season, 10-2 Ohio State's making the playoff. Are you fairly confident about that? Because that would include what would be a good win over Indiana. I think that is almost guaranteed, and maybe actually it is guaranteed.
I think a 10-2 Ohio State would still be in the playoff.
So I don't want people to go too far here. So we are in a let them lose version of college football now. I think that's healthier for everybody. But frankly, for the Blue Bloods, we are in a let them lose twice situation. And so it's the difference of, does Ohio State go and play in a way that makes you lose hope, that makes you lose faith in Ryan Day? Mm-hmm. Or do they go play good football and just lose to a good team on the road? And then you would say, hey, Ohio State, what's your problem? And at the end of the year, the committee would look at it. We would all look at it and say, okay, Ohio State's the 7 seed in the playoff, and their losses are to the 1 seed and the 5 seed, who otherwise went undefeated, basically, right? Except, so I don't want fans to go too far, Bill.
No, nor do I. But I get it. Like, no, there's not going to be, if Ohio State loses this game, there's not going to be any like silver lining context to it for anybody, right? Like I understand that. I think the reaction on the outside, whatever it is, will probably be warranted given Ryan Day's track record, but it doesn't factually mean the season is over, which is why I don't think you'll like. I disagree strongly with the Nick Bosa comment. Yeah.
Nicholas, is this the beginning of the end for Ryan Day if they don't win on Saturday? Oh boy, that was in all caps, by the way. So there are there's a decent amount of that. Dougie D, our guy. It's Ryan Day simply because the only coach who likes to make his fan base less happy than him is James Franklin. And he's going to do everything in his power to try to ruin that on Saturday with the loss. So again, there are comparisons to be made here. This is Josh. He's got zero ruthlessness and is losing the tiny edge he maybe had. Unless everyone from Penn State is hurt, the Buckeyes lose in a feckless, sad display of pure embarrassment. So much money wasted. Now that is getting pretty dark. Todd. Ryan Day is literally coaching for his job. A loss and it's over. His Lou Holtz anger has never translated on game day. Show me something. And then Sam, Ryan Day, wear the pants. We need Ryan Day to put on the big boy pants required for being the CEO of this team and take over the decision-making of the lines. He needs to be heavily involved in like the offensive and defensive line stuff, if not the outright guy when making the decisions on who the starting 5 is and ensuring there's actual D-line rotation. As they said in snap judgments, you can't have the DC waving the white flag about personnel choice. So I do think it's hard to separate the two. I would sort of understand fans bailing on Ryan Day if they lose. I don't think you should bail on the team and the season. But how do you separate the two?
I don't think you can separate the two, and I don't know if it came to that if I would tell people to try it. I don't think I get where people say that he's coaching for his job are coming from. I don't know that he actually is in this game because of everything we said. Like they're still going to have the opportunity. Ohio State is not going to fire its head coach in November when it has the possibility of still making the college football playoff. So I wouldn't go that far with it, but I guess the assumption being made is like, if you don't win this game, we're not going to expect you to win the other games you have to win to actually do something in the postseason. And then if that were the case, then yeah, maybe he is coaching for his job. Yeah.
It's just always very hard to like, what if Penn State is awesome, right? Like what if but there still would be
But Ohio
some
State's
component.
supposed to be awesome. Like
I know.
Yeah.
There would be some component of that where, like, still Ohio State did things wrong to allow Penn State to be awesome. Nobody in Columbus would just be like, well, Drew Aller, I'll tell you what, man, that guy has really matured.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, Tom Allen, he calls a great game. I don't know. What could we have done? That is not going to be the situation here. So, I've spent a good degree of time trying to pull people back from the edge, pull back Ohio State fans, all Northern fans, pull them back from the edge. But 20 years of doing it with Ohio State fans. And I like, if this happened this way, I don't know that I'd be doing it anymore. Like, I think you just gotta like how much leeway do you get? Right. So the season's not over. They still could have a home game in the playoff, and that would still be great. But to get the faith back, right? If this is the faith in this team, this program, this coach is gone with the loss, then there's not much to push against in that situation. So, all right, 5. Who are you taking?
I'll take it back to the players. I'll take Tyler Warren, the Penn State tight end. He is the offense. I think he is. Andy Koltonicki, I believe, is a tight end coach by trade. And he has fully weaponized Tyler Warren in Penn State's offense. He leads them in targets by a wide margin. He has 57 targets. The next closest player is Trey Wallace, the receiver, with 35. No other player has 20, by the way. So this is like, it's not a one-man offense because the running backs at Penn State are good, but it at times feels like a one-man offense with everything that they asked Tyler Warren to do. They move him around all over the place. He runs the ball. They put him in a wildcat quarterback situation. He has thrown the ball. I bet he does throw the ball in this game for Penn State, especially if Drew Aller does not play, which maybe we can talk about later. But he's just tight ends of this kind of skill are always a tough matchup for teams. I don't really care how good you are defensively, because you just don't typically have guys on defense who are this body type who can move that way. So it's going to be he is the guy that I think Jim Knowles and this defense need to key on. And if they can limit him in some way, I do think it really takes Penn State out of its game. And I actually like Wisconsin did a nice job last week of making sure that Tyler Warren did not take over the game. And then Penn State ends up with only 28 points, one of those touchdowns being a defensive touchdown. When Penn State finds ways to get really explosive, it has often been with Tyler Warren involved somehow. Even if he's not the one on the other end of a catch, like they'll move him to get you out of position and then throw the ball to somebody else, right? Or he'll, like I said, he'll run it, he'll throw it himself. So you really just have to, I think, give him a lot of attention if you're Ohio State. He's not. Maybe he is the most. No, he's not the most dangerous offensive weapon in this game. But I think, contrary to what you can do with Ohio, I don't think you can key on one guy for Ohio State. I really do think if you can key on him for Penn State, you do somewhat drastically limit what they might be able to do offensively.
So a companion conversation to this, and let me take my next pick, and we can have it. Is I'll take Caleb Downs for Ohio State.
I think that's right. Yeah.
How does Ohio State cover Tyler Warren, do you think? Because I will say someone else picked Sonny Styles because of trying to cover Tyler Warren. Vinny said, give me Sonny locked on Warren all day. Do not let him reproduce that USC impact, what Ty Warren did against USC. I don't like the idea of assigning Caleb Downs to him because he can reach so many parts of the field from a safety spot, and we've seen how critical many of his stops have been. If Arvell Reese and Cody Simon can contain the running backs, and Sonny can hold down Warren to a reasonable stat line, 4 DBs should be plenty sufficient to cover the outside skill positions that Penn State brings to the field. That's a pretty good breakdown by Vinny. And Sonny Styles burst on the scene to try to cover tight ends against Georgia. So could that be an answer? And then we'll talk about Caleb.
It's a good name to throw out there because honestly, I'm a little disappointed in myself that I hadn't remembered the Darnell Washington matchup that Ohio State locked in on when Ohio State played Georgia in the Peach Bowl a couple years ago, because that was Sonny hadn't really done much all year. He played a little bit against Wisconsin, I think, and maybe appeared in one other game. And then we were just like, hey, Georgia has this freakish tight end that really no one knows how to do anything with. What are you guys going to do? And it's like, Sonny's got it. So maybe I actually yeah, I say you don't typically have guys who are built like that who can move that well. Like Sonny Styles is
Yeah.
that guy, right? So yeah, I think I would, especially if Ohio State's going to play a decent amount of 4-3 in this game, which I think it probably will. If you can have Arvell Reese and Cody Simon like kind of play in the box and have Sonny as the Sam/nickel, just basically go wherever Tyler Warren goes, I would be confident in Caleb Downs being able to do something similar, but also concerned in how that limits the rest of the defense if you do that, because of how important Caleb Downs is to the whole operation.
And there are times where we end up talking before a game about a defensive guy handling a guy, and then you look back at the tape after the game, and it's like, okay, well, Sonny Styles was in coverage on Tyler Warren 4 times, and Cody Simon was on him twice, and Jordan Hancock was on him 3 times, and Caleb Downs was on him 4 times, and it wasn't a guy. It was a plan. And I do think Ohio State has enough guys that they could do that. You put Davis and Abignosin on Tyler Warren for a couple snaps if you want to, and tell him to go hold him. You know, like there are options there. Donald sent this in about Arvell Reese. Arvell needs to be on the field to stymie the run game and to allow Caleb Downs to stay back and play safety. Don't get me wrong, Downs making amazing downhill plays against the run is great, but you guys can check the tape when Downs creeps up or shows blitz, we get burned over the top. So like he is aware of like you, because I do think in me taking Caleb Downs, there's 2 parts to it here. And one of it is that he was a guy that I think you can find on tape making some key tackles. This is our guy, Josh. Last week, Caleb Downs had 3 game-saving tackles. This week, I feel he will slow down Penn State's run game and also have the first pick and pick 6 of the year. So that's a good prediction by Josh. But I think Caleb Downs is super smart. And if Andy Kotelnicki's trying to dial some stuff up and everyone like the window dressing and what's going on or whatever, I love like Andy Kotelnicki against Caleb Downs and Caleb Downs being like, you can't fool me. And then he's tackling Nick Singleton in the open field on a swing pass. He's covering Tyler Warren. He's making a tackle when somebody pops through a hole in the middle of the line. He's defending a play deep. Like I do think against a creative offensive coordinator, a super talented safety with a computer for a brain is what I would want to combat that. And so I think Caleb Downs might feel like he's in 3 different places at the same time in this game. And I do think like Andy Kotelnicki is going to try to stress this Ohio State defense. And I feel like Caleb Downs is kind of like the stress reliever. Will they make a good name for call him Advil? Hey,
I like that. Yeah.
Call him Advil. When offenses try to give us a headache, we just pop it to Caleb Downs. That'd be good NIL. That'd be a good NIL thing.
It should. So I don't know. Like so both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles said on Tuesday that they're expecting Lathan Ransom to practice this week.
Okay.
When he initially went out, I think we thought he'd be out for a couple weeks. So
okay.
I don't know if that's like gamesmanship or what. But if Lathan Ransom doesn't play, then I wonder how much they'll want to move around Caleb or if they'll want to make sure that he is like the last line of defense back there, right? If you're going to play last week, it was Jordan Hancock played a lot of safety. Jalen McClain played a lot of safety. I could see, and so I think if Ohio State wins, I think a big Caleb Downs game is a part of that. So I'm not saying that he won't play well or be impactful, but maybe he won't be down near the line so much if Lathan Ransom doesn't play.
And sometimes you have that deep safety and it's like, okay, that's to help on deep shots. But really, I think against this Penn State team and the way we've seen Ohio State play, it's more about last line of defense against the run game.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much, whether it's Drew Aller or Bo Perbula playing quarterback for Penn State, how much they're going to throw down the field. But boom, here comes Katron Allen. Don't let him go for 40. That would be a good way to use Caleb Downs because he's very capable of doing that. All right, so I took Caleb Downs 6. Who are you taking 7?
I'll take Will Howard.
Okay.
Who on Saturday after the game kind of put it out there that he's looking to play well against Penn State. He's playing back home. I think his sister might go to Penn State. There's like some familial ties to that program. He grew up a Penn State fan. He's not hidden from that. And it was a huge deal for him to want to play for Penn State when he was a kid. and that never happened. And now he gets to go play in Beaver Stadium. And I'm curious what version of Will Howard that creates. Does that create a super dialed in, you've never seen a quarterback play so well kind of Will Howard? Or does that create a watch this Will Howard who then works himself up a little too much and starts making mistakes? I don't know which one to expect, because Will Howard's never, I think, been in this position before. Now he had never been in a situation quite like the Oregon game, and I thought he played really well there. This is a similar situation from a football standpoint, obviously, but then you layer like emotions on top of that, and I just think he needs to be careful about channeling that the right way. But I think that he will, and I think the fact that I'm expecting Ohio State to run him more in this game might help him do that. Where it's not going to, I don't know that it can become a game, if you're Ohio State, where Will Howard is dropping back 40 times and you're really putting it on him to make plays with his arm over and over and over again. Because that's where, if there are emotions that are at times like toying with you a little bit, I think that's where it can get a little tricky. But maybe him running might be able to settle him into that a little more than it would otherwise.
How did he talk about the Penn State thing? Was he specifically asked about it and he had to answer it, or did he have that holstered and just find a way to work it in?
No, he was it was the last question of his post-game press conference was like, what do you think about going back home to play at Penn State? And he said like, I'm stoked. It was like he was like staring into the camera. He said like, I'm stoked. I can't wait for it, or something like that. I grew up a Penn State fan. I wanted to play there when I was a kid. They never offered me because they didn't think I was good enough. And I guess on Saturday we'll find out if I was.
Okay. So he was asked it and he had it holstered.
Yeah. Yeah. Both.
Okay. This was Pat on the texts. I think Howard's still the most important. He needs to continue to get the ball in the playmaker's hands. He has done a really good job of that this season. Do that and don't turn the ball over. While the defense is very important, I don't know if I could key in on one specific person. So it is about Will in Pat's mind. That can be dangerous. But it is sort of interesting. Like, how did a kid from Downingtown, Pennsylvania wind up at Kansas State? It's like, well, because Penn State didn't offer him.
Yeah, and I was looking at some of the classes. Like, they took Will Levis, I think, the year before Will Howard, or maybe 2 years before Will Howard.
Too many Wills.
Yeah, maybe. And they had like Tyquan Roberson was around the same time, and there was somebody else they took, but they weren't. It wasn't like Will Howard was in their backyard as a 3-star prospect, and they didn't take him because they got some high 4-star kid from Georgia to be in their class. Like,
yeah,
it is a little odd to me, because he at least gave us the impression that they never really gave him a look at all. That's a little strange to me that was the case.
Okay. All right. I'll pair this up with Jeremiah Smith.
Okay.
And Jeremiah Smith has had one game this season of at least 10 targets. It was the Oregon game. 9 catches on 13 targets for 100 yards. Otherwise, his targets this year, 864, 654. Hit 4 targets last week. Let's go back in the Wayback Machine. Who would be a good person that we could use as a comparison for Jeremiah Smith? I can't really think of anybody that we could compare him to. Oh, wait.
I think hypothetically, it could be someone who had 21 catches in 2 games against Penn State.
Yeah. Marvin Harrison Jr. last year had 5 games of at least 10 targets, the most against Penn State. 11 catches on 15 targets for 162 yards and a touchdown. And you're saying he was a monster in 2022 against them as well?
Yeah, in 2022 at Beaver Stadium was 10 for 185, and I think all 10 were for first downs.
10 catches on 12 targets. Again, that tied his season high in targets. So this tells you what? This tells you that even in a world, Penn State has a good secondary. Penn State has a very good secondary. So people need to know this, that A.J. Harris as a transfer corner from Georgia and Jalen Kimber as a transfer corner from Florida have been hugely impactful for Penn State this year. They lost K.J. Winston, who's a great safety, but they still have Jalen Reed. They still have Zaki Wheatley, right? Wheatley.
Yep.
So like they have a good secondary, but they always have a good secondary. And the last 2 years, Ohio State attacked that good secondary with its best weapon. its best receiver. So give me 15 targets. Give me 15 Jeremiah Smith targets. And I will say on the Wednesday Kings of the North, Ari Wasserman joined us, and we were having a Heisman conversation as part of a long, rambling, interesting discussion about the Heisman. And we brought up Jeremiah Smith, what that could look like. And Ari was like, well, they got to throw the ball to him more. Like, it's time. I'm not sure what the reason would be to not have Jeremiah Smith. I'll set the minimum. As long as it's not some kind of goofy game where Ohio State gets 3 defensive scores and never has the ball, minimum 12 targets. Is that fair in a game like this?
I think so. I would do it. And in that game in 2022, when Marv had 10 for 185, Emeka Egbuka in his only start against Penn State had 6 for 53. So, like, that's a decent game too. Penn State was good to the second. It's a similar conversation, I guess, to the defensive lines that Penn State has had and brought into this game. The secondaries have been great. There have been bona fide NFL players in those secondaries, and they have not really been able to cover Ohio State's guys. And yes, I think this Penn State secondary is pretty good. I don't know that it's as good as some of the others that Ohio State has faced in this matchup. So, provided Will Howard is not on his back, I think he'll have pretty decent opportunities to work the ball to Jeremiah Emeka and Carnell Tate. Who I thought emerged a little bit last week against Nebraska when they needed someone to step up and make some big plays.
But also, like, to be clear, like, this is not a get the ball to the receivers conversation. Make Jeremiah Smith win this game. Give him the chance to win this game for you. And I do think, as good as Kimber and Harris are for Penn State, I don't think either of them are as good as Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon. So, and Jeremiah still did his thing against Oregon. So, like, this, I don't think either of them
was as good as Joey Porter Jr. last year.
No. Oh yeah, that was the game. That was the 22 game. Ago. That was like Marvin Harrison Jr. versus Joey Porter Jr. and Marvin Harrison Jr. undressed him. And it was like, oh, Joey Porter Jr. is not good. And it's like, no, he was the first pick of the second round, and he's an NFL starter right now. He is good. He still couldn't cover Marvin Harrison Jr. and this passing attack.
Last year was Kalen King and Johnny Dixon, and Kalen King was like a second round pick, wasn't he?
I think he might have been a little bit lower, but like, he was very highly thought of, because coming off 22, it was like, hey, like, Joey Porter Jr. got all the love, but maybe Kalen King's actually better than him. And Kalen King came back in 23 and then wasn't as good in 23 as he was in 22. So anyway, the good thing for Ohio State fans is the last 2 years, Ohio State has shown a propensity to let its best receiver go win the game for them. So let's do that again. If you're Ohio State, no excuse. If Jeremiah Smith has 5 catches on 7 targets, like, grilling time. What are you doing? Like, why is this? You found a way in the past to get the ball to your best playmaker. How did you not find a way to do that this game? So I think that is, and if we start thinking about it too much, like, I could talk myself into Jeremiah Smith should have been one, because it's like, hey, what's the plan for this game? I don't know. Let Ohio State's most talented player go win the game by himself. Oh, I don't know. Well, that sounds like a good plan. I would maybe do that. maybe do that. It's like, watch out for Andy Kotelnicki. He's got a beard. He's a big teddy bear. He doesn't have Jeremiah Smith.
He does not.
What's your scheme?
Andy Kotelnicki might cut off a limb to get Jeremiah Smith.
Oh my God. That's the scheme. The scheme is, do you see that guy who's a teenage NFL player? That's the scheme. I don't even know what it's called. We could just snap the ball directly to him.
Maybe they will.
It cannot be 5 catches on 7 targets. It cannot.
No.
Cannot. And like, well, we got the ball to Emeka 11 times. It cannot be 5 catches on 7 targets. Agree?
I agree. Yes.
He had the back-breaking, they don't win the game without him bomb last week against Nebraska, but why did he only have 3 catches on 4 targets last week? And
they only threw the ball 16 times.
So, I guess that's part of it too. Is like, are they here to establish the run, or are they here to be like, I don't care if we run it all. Get the ball to Jeremiah Smith.
Well, their run rate last week against Nebraska was 63%. For the season, it's 53%. So there was a decent uptick there. I think that was them not knowing what kind of pass protection they were going to get.
Okay,
and then it turned out to not be very good. So they gotta find ways to work around that, which is why my next pick will be Chip Kelly.
Okay. This was a popular one.
And in my opinion, and like I wasn't going back watching all 22, whatever, just watching the game and rewatching the game. Didn't feel like they were doing a whole lot to work around what everyone expected to be a deficiency at left tackle and then was a deficiency at left tackle. So maybe now that that's under their belt and it didn't go well, that they will start doing that now. And I thought that Chip called a really good game against Oregon for the most part. So I'm not like worried that he's not going to bring it for this game. I'm just saying like he needs to. Like this needs to be a Chip Kelly scheme it up kind of Saturday. Even if you think you have great matchups with Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka against Penn State secondary, which I think you do because you have great matchups against most teams. We can throw those guys out there. I don't think it's a do what we do, out execute them kind of game. I think Chip needs to get into his bag a little bit in this one to help better protect the run game, to get the RPO going, to get Will Howard involved, and even with all of that, maybe the thing they do best and do most is still throw the ball to Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Ibuka. That's fine. I'm not saying go out there and establish it and run it 40 times. But Chip needs to have something, and I think a few somethings here. And going up against a good defense and a good coordinator in Tom Allen, right? So Tom Allen will have something for Ohio State, I'm sure, that it hasn't seen, and Chip Kelly typically does too for Ohio State's opponents, even if maybe he didn't feel like he did last week against Nebraska. So that needs to be on full display here. I thought Chip on Tuesday was a little, I don't know, like dismissive of the notion maybe that Ohio he did not put the offense in the best position to be successful.
Okay.
Which is like, okay, that if you want to feel that way, that's fine. But then I think you need to come out against Penn State then and call a better game and show people who think that why they were wrong.
Yeah. I do want to say this about Jeremiah Smith because I should have read this text before from Jamie, who picked Jeremiah Smith. When talent equates, Ohio State's special stars are the X factor. JT Barrett, Joey Bosa, Chase Young, Maserati Marv all had monster games versus Penn State. So Jamie, and there wasn't as a ton of Jeremiah in the responses, and so I thought like let your stars go win these big games was a point very well taken there, and I think it may have influenced my pick on Chip. A lot of people on Chip. This is Chris. Although it could be any of the coaches, they're picking Chip Kelly. I think this game hinges on Chip's play calls. Can he scheme enough to hide our massive weakness? O-line, specifically left tackle. Penn State's offense will score, but I'm not terrified by it, and I suspect we need to score 24 to 28 or more points to win. I'm terrified by Penn State's D-line wrecking the game, strip sacks, hurried throws leading to interceptions, repeated 3-and-outs. Can Chip scheme around it? That is the game. Is that like you're nodding, Landis? You think that's in range? Okay.
Yeah, and I think probably like saying like scheme around it is making it sound simpler than it actually is. But
yeah,
we saw like Chip changed it up a lot against Iowa, right? They ran out of the pistol a ton when they hadn't done that previously. They did a nice job with RPOs off of that. They did the stuff with Emeka Ibuka in the backfield against Oregon. So I'm just like he needs to come with like a similar idea here against Penn State. I don't like roll the ball out and we're better than them. I don't think is going to get it done in this game.
Yeah. Craig, Chip Kelly must call a much better game than he was doing against Nebraska. In particular, he needs to provide a tight end to help block on the left side of that line or have the running back chip that defensive end. If they don't help the left side of that line, we are going to be in for a long game. Would also like to see some of that RPO creativity he added earlier in the season with the quarterback sprinting out and throwing on the run. That's Craig in San Diego. And then Carl said Chip Kelly, if he puts together the correct game plan and schemes up a way to neutralize Abdul Carter, then Ohio State can dominate and win comfortably. If Ryan Day and his talent-equated thought process bleeds over to Kelly, then no chance, right? So when you're saying, right, you can't just roll it out there and think you have better talent, we talk a lot about like, okay, you even said it. Is James Franklin going to hold Andy Koltelnicki back? Like, if Chip's going to do all this stuff, like Ryan Day has to make sure Chip has the freedom to do this stuff.
Yeah, and I think he did against Oregon. I'm not even talking like trick plays necessarily. I'm just talking like tendency breakers, some different formation stuff you haven't put on tape yet. That kind of stuff. I'm not saying go out there and reinvent the sport, but I think Ryan Day will probably. It did seem Ryan Day seemed pretty unhappy with Chip Kelly last week without saying as much.
Okay.
So I'd imagine they had some pretty honest conversations this week about those things, but I don't think the result of that is going to be Ryan Day like taking the sticks away from Chip Kelly or trying to rein him in. If anything, maybe you should let him be a little more free flowing than he was against Nebraska.
It is interesting because Jim Knowles was in the same situation. And I think we still see Jim Knowles working it out to some degree. When you have very established, successful coaches who have never coached the level of talent Ohio State has, I do think they can get caught in between of just let our guys be our guys versus, okay, your creativity is kind of what got you here. Because even when Chip was at Oregon, it's not like he had the talent that Ohio State has.
Mm-hmm.
He was taking small, fast guys and figuring out a way. Jim Knowles was taking less talented guys and taking risks and moving players around. And then you get to Ohio State, and it's not only all better. Oh, I'll just do the same stuff I was doing with lesser talent, with more talent. Because no, you don't want your creativity to get in the way of the talent. But then maybe you wind up with a game like last week where it's like, well, okay, like the talent needed a little bit of help, especially when you have weaknesses. I do think it's not an excuse, but it is something to be worked through.
I think it is. Jim Knowles, I think, like said as much when he first got here, because we were asking him about the stuff he did at Oklahoma State and what might translate to Ohio State. And I think with trying to not be insulting to the players he had at Oklahoma State, he's like, well, it's a little different here, right? So, which I on some level I think is true, right? You like, to your point, you don't want to let all your wildest schematical ideas get in the way of just letting talent be talent. But I think everyone who's watched Ohio State under Ryan Day would probably say that they've relied on talent being talent a little too much, right?
Yes.
Especially in big games. So there's always that balance there, but I think we have enough data now to tell us that they can't fall back on that in a game like this. They have to bring something extra.
Let me throw Justin Fry into this conversation because he's not going to get picked individually, the offensive line coach. This is not sure who this is from. This bum needs to figure out a solution to the left tackle issue by noon on Saturday, or he will single-handedly be the reason for this season's failure and the biggest reason that Day and the rest of the staff will be fired at year end. This is a problem of his own making. Guys get hurt. It's unfortunate. It turned out to be a good job by Justin Fry to identify Josh Simmons, who we had recruited at UCLA, who knew that guy was out there. They targeted that guy in the portal. They helped develop him to the next level, and Josh Simmons has played very good football the last 2 years. But the rest of this, there are not other things from an injury standpoint or other things, right? I mean, I do like this is the O-line coach has to solve this. And this is a little bit, it's like Apollo 13 that what do you have? You have to take what you have, and you get all the scientists in the room and say, okay, we have a roll of tape and some paper cups and some yarn. And can we patch a hole on the spaceship with that? They got to patch a hole in the spaceship. Paris Johnson's not walking through that door. But this is what coaching is. Good player, go play. That's pretty easy. So I do like this is a huge week for Justin Fry.
This is what the money's for, as they say, right?
So was last week, and it wasn't very. If that was Justin Fry's, Ryan's like, Justin, what you got? Can you imagine if that was a class presentation? It's like, okay, Justin, you had an extra week to work on this because we had a bye week. Please get up in front of the class and give us your presentation. And it's like, it's like, did you just come up with this in the hallway 5 minutes ago, Justin? Go back and do it again. We will do your presentation again next week, and I expect it to be better. Did you ever do the presentations? Did you have the thing ever in school where you had to do a presentation about a historical figure and dress as a historical figure?
No, kids definitely did that for History Day, but I didn't do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I had to do one like in 5th grade, and I was Dwight Eisenhower, and my dad was in the military. So he had like a real Army helmet that I got to wear, and I got to wear like Army clothes and be the guy who planned D-Day. So
that's great. That is part of like,
Justin
isn't that
Fry?
for if you're doing a History Day thing, you have the option of doing like the poster board thing, but also then like basically creating like your own skit. Yeah.
My older daughter was very much into History Day and actually made it to Washington, D.C. to nationals one time. But like she never did the skit, but I've seen other kids present like a historical narrative dressed as the historical figure. It's quite a thing. Yeah. So Justin Fry, get up there. I don't know who's the greatest offensive line coach of all time. Dress like that guy.
Ed Warner.
Ed Warner is seriously going to email after the show and be like, see, it's not so easy. So, okay. A lot on them. I'll finish with Drew Aller. And it starts with whether he's going to play or not.
Yeah.
So how big of a deal? So Drew Aller, if for Ohio State fans who weren't watching the Penn State game last week, he got sacked with like a minute left in the Wisconsin game in the first half of the Wisconsin game. And I actually initially didn't think it was that bad. I've said this before. I thought maybe it was a groin or a hamstring. Like he kind of got stretched, but it's not like he got folded under or had somebody land on him. So he limped off to the locker room, came back out for the second half with a left knee brace on, tried to throw, and like sort of was like, I can't, it's not working. So it does, since he had a knee brace on, it seems like it was a knee thing. And James Franklin on Monday basically said he's going to be a game time decision. I think it's possible Penn State could win with Bo Pribula. I think he's not going to be afraid of the moment. I think he's a good quarterback. He's not. If he was better than Drew Aller, he'd start ahead of Drew Aller. He's not. Right. I don't think it's dissimilar to what they had with Trace McSorley as a starter and Will Levis as a run threat backup, who then he transferred to Kentucky and became an NFL quarterback. I'm not saying Bo Pribula is going to be an NFL quarterback, but I think it turned out you could see a guy who was a run threat backup at Penn State turned out to be pretty good. So I just like, if you're an Ohio State fan, if Bo Pribula comes out for the first snap, I wouldn't be like, that's it, Ohio State's got this in the bag. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that would not be my reaction either. It does change the offense.
It does.
It becomes more of a quarterback run game. And I guess in that way, this week probably is pretty difficult for Jim Knowles trying to prepare for either option, because based off some stuff that I've heard talking to people around Penn State, like it truly is a game time decision. I think it will be. Like I don't know that there's anybody who at this point thinks that Drew Aller is definitely not playing.
You think it's like come out and warm up and see how it feels.
See how you feel. Yeah. Which is kind of what it was in the second half of the Wisconsin game. He went into the locker room, he came out with a brace on. Maybe he always wears a brace. I can't recall.
I thought it was new. I think it was new.
But they James Franklin said, like, I wanted him to be honest with me. We were worried about his mobility, so they played Bo Pribula because they know they have a viable backup quarterback. I guess the question becomes, like, even if Drew Aller's not feeling 100% himself, what is the percentage of that Penn State feels comfortable playing him?
Yes.
Part of what has made Drew Aller an improved quarterback this year is him extending plays, is him scrambling a little bit, is him being more involved in the run game and Andy Koltelnicki's offense. And if you're taking that off the table,
yes,
and he's just a pocket passer, I'd probably rather play Bo Pribula if I'm Penn State. But like I in that case,
it is a very complicated decision. It's not just there's a meter. Like if Aller's 85% and he can move around, then he plays. If he's 65% and he can't really move around, then play Pribula. But the other thing is they like to put two quarterbacks on the field together. They like to do some trick stuff. If Aller can't play at all, that takes some of that away. I would almost wonder if they could get into a situation where Aller's the starter, but Pribula, instead of playing 10% of the time, plays 35% of the time. Yeah. Maybe he's really the red zone quarterback once you get inside the 20. Maybe on 2nd and 2, he comes into the game there really is a rotation there that's more. It's hugely important because he's made a step. And by the way, if we're going to talk about, hey, Will Howard, you're from Pennsylvania, now you play for Ohio State. Drew Aller's from Ohio, now he plays for Penn State. And so, like, he wants to play well against the Buckeyes. That's not the first time, but he has made a step. And Andy Koltelnicki has helped him do that. If you just look at the stats comparing him this year to last year, his average depth of target this year is 9.6 yards. Last year, it was 8. So they're throwing it down the field a little bit more. His yards per attempt this year is 10. Last year it was 6.7, right? Down the field a little bit more. His big time throw percentage for PFF, how often do you make big time throws? Last year it was 2.9% of the time. This year it's 4.7% of the time. So they are pushing it a little bit more. Last year he completed 60% of his passes. This year it's 71. So he's improved, and Ohio State's fans need to know he's better than the guy you saw last year.
Yeah.
And I thought he would play well going into the Ohio State game last year. And I think I probably put people on alert. And then it was like, what? This? Ohio State should have been worried about this? It was handcuffs for 3 quarters. So the handcuffs are off. It doesn't mean he's CJ Stroud. He is not. But it is a more functional attacking passing game that he has shown his capability within, their receivers still aren't great. This is not Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and Dylan Gabriel. It is not. But it is far more functional than it has been. And that could matter.
It could matter. I think it will matter. I guess the one thing, and we talked about this a little bit on KOTN, I think maybe going into the Wisconsin game, or at some point, like his average depth of target has been different in Big Ten play. It was 13 against West Virginia. It was 12 against Bowling Green. It was 12 against Kent State. It was 6 against Illinois. It was 8.6 against UCLA, 9 against USC, and 7.5 against Wisconsin. So I think the downfield throwing, and I think it's more about Penn State's receivers' ability to get open against good defensive backs than it is about Drew Aller's willingness to throw the ball down the field. But I don't want to set an expectation that Penn State's going to come in and bomb the ball down the field on Ohio State.
Agreed.
But I do think Drew Aller is more predisposed to trying to attack than he was last year if the chances are there.
Yeah. In the West Virginia game that I was at, they schemed open a guy for a big hit early, and then right before the end of the first half, they just chucked it down the field and took a shot, and Amari Evans went up and beat 2 corners for the ball for a 50-yard gain that normally Penn State wouldn't do. So, yeah, we don't want to overstate it, but it is better. And his health is quite a factor in this game. Couldn't get to everything that everybody submitted. People submitted the Ohio State tight ends doing something. Seth McLaughlin, Larry Johnson, JT Tuimoloau. There was some James Franklin stuff. Denzel Burke, which coming off the Oregon game is very understandable. The Ohio State defensive ends getting after people. Someone said Arvell Reese. I thought this was a very interesting one, Landis. This is Rich. Jaden Fielding. I cannot believe with everything going on that I am picking a kicker, but I can't get the image of that last terrible field goal attempt out of my head. These games with Penn State lately have been very competitive, but very wonky. And I just feel like we're going to need Fielding to nail all of his field goal attempts. It's very possible that we have to settle for a field goal numerous times, and special teams could be the difference in a game like this. Cough, cough, 2016. Interesting. That was an interesting point, I thought.
It's not a bad thought. I do think special teams could matter in this game. Whether that's field goals, whether or not you miss or make them, or whether or not a team's able to make a play in the punt game or steal a possession the way that Oregon did against Ohio State with that onside kick, or I guess it was an onside kick. So yeah, I could very much see special teams being a factor in this game.
Yeah. On Denzel Burke, Jeff said it's either whether it's Bo or Drew playing for Penn State, it doesn't really matter. But especially if it's Bo, the corners need to play their best game of the season in this one. Penn State's receivers are good, but nothing special. They all have their individual skill sets and strengths, but there is not a true number one guy that should scare them out wide. If the corners play great and allow the safeties and linebackers to focus on Tyler Warren, the running backs, then the run game, and that would solidify themselves defensively. It's like, just let the corners take away the receivers is what Jeff's saying. And then everybody else can worry about Warren and the running back. So, it's one of those things. Like Evan, as we said, we didn't say it on the show. Evan Stewart, the Oregon receiver who burned Denzel Burke for that first touchdown, has had 5 of 8 games for Oregon this year where he's had 26 receiving yards or fewer. So it's not like Ohio State got burned by Jeremiah Smith. They got burned by a guy who 5 other teams have basically, he's done nothing against them. So, like, if Evan Stewart could do it, Amari Evans could do it. Right now, Tez Johnson's Tez Johnson. He does that for everybody for Oregon. So Penn State doesn't have that. But the point is, a receiver who's not an All-American smoked Ohio State. So be on alert.
I thought Nebraska's receivers were getting behind Ohio State at times. So like that to me is like maybe a blemish that wasn't necessarily resolved coming off of the Oregon game, but that Ohio State kind of lived to tell about against Nebraska because Dylan Raiola, was missing throws. Yeah.
Drew Aller won't miss the throws that Dylan Raiola missed. I don't think he will.
I would think not. Yeah. Not at home.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. Those are the 10 people we think are the most influential for this game. To wrap it up real quick, the Ohio State left tackle, Penn State offensive coordinator Andy Hotulnicki, Penn State defensive end / linebacker Abdul Carter, Ohio State head coach Ryan Day, Penn State tight end Tyler Warren, Ohio State safety Caleb Downs, Ohio State quarterback Will Howard, Ohio State receiver Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State offensive coordinator Chip Kelly, and Penn State quarterback Drew Aller. You heard a lot of our thoughts here, but we'll get a little more statistical when we do the big game breakdown. Landis, we usually bring in a lot of like success rate and havoc rate and even more statistical stuff, even more film watching kind of stuff. So that will be on Thursday's Kings of the North. I think we'll lead with that. So if you don't want to watch all of Kings of the North, that's fine. If you're really just an Ohio State fan who wants to know about this game, I think you can just watch or listen to like the first half hour of that show, and we'll take care of it, and then we'll give you our picks there. Fair?
Mm-hmm. Fair.
Yeah. We still really, I mean, we don't want this audience to think that we don't care about this audience. It's just we needed. I frankly need another day to like get everything in line.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to like just do the same thing twice. So we hope that was helpful getting ready for this game. We may have a watch along on Kings of the North on Saturday. Is that we think we're leaning towards
kicking
that?
Around the idea. Yeah, we got to figure out some logistics of that, I think, but
yeah,
definitely kicking around the idea.
So maybe if you're not subscribed to Kings of the North, maybe subscribe, and that way if we come on live like at 11 a.m. before the Ohio State Penn State game, and then Landis and I are just like sitting on a couch sort of watching the game along with you, you could partake in that. So, and if you go to look for it and it's not there, that means we couldn't pull it off, but I think we're going to try. So that's the plan. All right. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Urostowski, for making us look good and sound good. We will see you Sunday, regardless, on Kings of Columbus for the Kings of Columbus Sunday sound off after this game. But for now, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises. And that was Kings of Columbus on the podcast.